Welcome to the logical way to survive the wilderness. Step 1. Make sure to bring plenty of food, water, and... Step 2. Test your ability to make a proper fire. This will keep undesired creatures away from your encampment.
Step 3. Once you have set up your encampment, realize you are completely alone right now.
The introduction of analog horror was one of the most unexpected, yet completely terrifying things I had ever experienced. The most disturbing part of many analog horrors is how realistic they can sometimes seem, but it was such a relief to always find out that these entities never really existed. Yet, part of me always wondered, what if that wasn't the case? Thinking logically, what would be the best method of surviving? With this thought in mind, I started out with classics, such as Alex Kister's Mandela Catalog and Remy Abode's Gemini Home Entertainment. It wasn't until recently, after posting a video covering the two, that I would be recommended two completely new series I had never seen before. Welcome, I'm Mr.Mirage, and today we are taking another logical look into analog horror, and adding two more disturbing and unique series to our threat scale. This is a logical approach to analog horror. Just another reminder that before we begin, I will only be using the information provided in the official series to make logical guesses, but due to the obscurity of some of these series, an educated guess is often the best we can do, so take it with a grain of salt. By far the most recommended series for me to cover would come to be Vita Carnis, a series virtually unknown to me, so I decided to jump in blind. If you're unfamiliar, Vita Carnis is a series of informational tapes posted in 2022, explaining an animal genius you may not be familiar with. This horrific creatures, known as the Vita Carni, or the Carni for short, appeared on Earth and quickly became a global threat. Unlike the animals we are used to, some of the Carnis are specifically engineered to hunt and kill humans, throwing everything we knew about the food chain out the window. On top of that, a new island has appeared off the coast of Hudson Bay, Canada, and a massive Titanic-sized creature appears to be standing dormant, waiting for something, or someone. To make matters worse, rather than combating this threat, a section of humanity has created a cult dedicated to brainwashing the general populace to worship the Carni, even snaking their way into high-ranking government positions as a method of covering up the Carni species, as to keep humans ignorant and with that, vulnerable. But eventually, as expected, this spirals out of control. In order to figure out a way to survive this nightmare, we have to take a look into what we are dealing with, sorting the main 7 species of the Carni into 3 categories, 3 being extremely dangerous to humans, 1 being virtually harmless. Class 1 Carni consists of the Scandari Carnis, the Ignavis Carnis, and the Muturi Carnis. All 3 are essentially harmless to humans, other than being absolutely terrifying. The Crawl is essentially a plant-like creature that is the origin of the rest of the Carni, growing at a supernatural rate, yet surprisingly, rather than hurting the environment, increasing local plant growth. An odd but common theme we will see over and over in this series. The Trimming and Meat Snake are both essentially scavengers that prey on scraps or dead creatures, drawing more similarities to, say, vultures and other decomposers than an actual threat. Moving on to Class 2 Carni, we have the Imperium Carnis and the Colum Carnis. The former, also known as the Host of Influence, possesses the ability to release spores into the air that, when breathed by a human, will make their health deteriorate until they are eventually forced towards the host body that has been rooted into the ground. Now, as horrific as it sounds, we see in the series itself that they are relatively rare, and gas masks are shown to be effective against breathing the spores, as well as the condition wearing off if an infected individual is kept from the host for 36 hours. So overall, it's not a huge threat, as long as you aren't alone when contracting the spores. With our next Carni being the towering creatures known before as the Monoliths, And while their size and EMP abilities, along with hundreds of massive fast-moving tendrils that could kill any human in seconds, should make them a massive threat, the monoliths are only known to exist on the previously mentioned island in Hudson Bay, and for the most part remain docile statues, but that does not mean they don't have the potential to be dangerous, landing them as a Class 2. So far, you would be forgiven for thinking that the Carnies aren't that big of a threat. However, with the introduction of these Class 3 Carnies, this couldn't be further from the truth. Class 3 Carnies can almost serve as the main and only threats of the Carnis species. The Congregator Carnis and the disturbing Trucidatum Carnis both possessing brutal and effective tactics for killing humans. Imagine one day you were with your family on a camping trip, only to notice a sign depicting a bulbous plant-like creature. You disregard the sign as it is something you are unfamiliar with. Upon exploring the campsite, you suddenly hear the screams of someone in the woods, and upon following the noise, you are led to a twitching body, laying on the ground with giant hooked fangs digging into them from both sides, and the realization hits. You are in a biological minefield. Enter Congregator Carnis, the Harvester. Different from many of the other Carnies, the Harvester stays attached to the crawl, growing into a bulbous mass and rooting its bear trap-like tendrils underground to trap any creature large enough for it to warrant a worthy meal. The Congregator Carnis kills quickly, with one of its spines releasing a neurotoxin designed to paralyze its body, while the other prevents your blood from clotting, meaning you essentially bleed out and die. With the speed of these effects and the fact that during the whole process you'll be stuck in its death grasp, these creatures are essentially immediate death, if you find yourself caught. They can reach up to hundreds of meters from the bulb itself. The only saving grace is the fact that the bulb is shown to be extremely weak, being vulnerable to any ranged weapon. It seems like even a carefully targeted arrow could possibly disable this creature's trap. So the key here is to be aware. It can also be fooled by throwing heavy items such as nearby heavy stones or a backpack or article of clothing to distract its spines for a few seconds, so you can slowly move away and out of its range. This, along with overall avoidance, seems to be the best method of surviving harvesters, so be mindful of their habitats, being forests in the northern hemisphere, and if you happen to find yourself in one, make sure you keep an eye out for bulbs, as they are fairly obvious. A theory I also developed is when walking into a forest, throwing any form of heavy rock or bark or any thick item that you can stand on beneath your feet, then throwing it ahead of yourself, then turning around and picking up the one behind you and doing the same thing, treating it like a floor as lava game, until you reach a safe zone, or if you're trying to be the Doomslayer, towards the bulb where you can stab or shoot the center, rupturing the venom sac and killing the creature. That way, if it does activate, it will clamp onto whatever object you are standing on and not your flesh, and you can walk away alive. The next creature is the most dangerous of the Carni family, and by far the most terrifying. And just in case you aren't sure, picture coming home from a long day of work or school. You're exhausted and want to take a rest for a bit before you realize your family left to go run some errands. You drift off to sleep. Hours pass, and a rustling noise wakes you up. You look around your room to see nothing but a red face with a dead smile peering out of your wardrobe. Your gun won't do anything, as it's most likely you will fall prey to the Trucidatum Carnis, or the Mimic. These creatures have a high level of intelligence and a diet of purely human flesh. They hunt by stalking their prey for days, learning their pattern, and figuring out when you are the most vulnerable. They will also hide in your furniture as to make it easier for them to corner you once you are alone. This creature by itself, I believe, accommodates for about 70% of the danger to humanity and possesses 3 main forms, not including its juvenile form. Apart from the main adult form, the Mimic, if eaten well enough, can assume one of 2 forms, one being almost identical to human beings and use clothes to blend in until it's too late. The other, known as the Elder Mimic, is known to be extremely resistant to any form of readily available weapon, along with possessing a dark body that can blend in with the night. It possesses a now toothless smile and will get more resistant to weapons the more it eats, making guns and melee weapons an overall bad idea. Not to mention kind of a lame choice as to logically survive these things. Now, it took me a while to figure out how to counter these things, but I seem to have found an answer. There is a full video that tells you how to help yourself, but in my opinion, it seems to be a fake tactic, as it is contradicted by the original information tape, as it will state that guns can be used against a mimic, despite the original video strictly specifying to never use guns against a mimic, as there's no way it will kill it before it manages to tear into you due to its extreme speed. The only saving grace is the fact that mimics, along with many other carni, and really every living creature, relies on food for energy, and due to the intelligence of these creatures, they exist only in places that they know they can get food, meaning the mimic only crowds to high-density places. However, if you notice, for some reason, the West Coast isn't one of these locations. They also seem to shy away from extremely hot and cold climates. Now, whether that is because lack of people or the temperature itself is unknown. Something I also heavily overlooked in the last video is the use of fire. The biggest weakness of carnies is that they are made of meat. So making a homemade Molotov cocktail or heating up metal objects to extreme temperature on a stovetop or fireplace, like, say, a machete or fire poker before an attack, could definitely help you cut through a charging mimic, like butter, as well as any chemical mixture that is known to dissolve tissue. So overall, the best plan would be to choose a location that is livable but not densely populated, and your chances of a mimic appearing is low. It is also worth mentioning that mimics seem to only attack if they know it is a guaranteed kill, as to not waste their energy. This is hinted multiple times, such as a mimic victim sarcastically stating, "It would be a perfect time for a serial killer to kill me right now," right before, coincidentally, being abducted by a stalking mimic. In safety videos, it is also stated that they will not attack you if you have a clear way out, as well as they will not search for long if they cannot find you. So as long as you're not hiding in your closet with your flashlight on, you could easily have a panic room or just a room with a solid door and no windows, and you could be safe for the time being. But that doesn't mean that it won't try again next time you fall asleep. Now, similar to Gemini Home Entertainment, some humans are also against you, as that cult from earlier engineered a seasoning known by Flavor Enhancer that is specifically made from the host of influenza's spores. It's that, if you remember, are designed to brainwash. It's safe to say it's probably better not to buy suspicious food products, especially if they have this logo anywhere on it. But even worse than janky food products, this carnies cult of sorts has snaked its way into the government and tried to keep this whole situation under wraps. However, this corruption would eventually lead to the development of the Containment and Research Consult Association Society, or CARCAS for short. That's a fucking pun. At the end of Season 1, we see CARCAS attempting a breach into the Hudson Bay Island, and they get in pretty easily as there doesn't seem to be mimics present. They would find the cultists performing a ritual around the final and most unknown carni known as Verum Carnis, or the Singularity, ending in a sort of cliffhanger. And it is worth mentioning, not much is said about this singularity. We just know that it's the center of all this. Now, since this analog horror is relatively new, and very underdeveloped as of now, we can assume the carcass was able to shut down this cult, or at least make them less of a threat. And to the average person, the biggest threats would still be the mimic, the harvester, and in rare cases, the host. So applying a gas mask or simply anything that could filter particles in the air, and keeping an antifungal medicine on hand, as they are referred to as spores, making me think they are similar to fungal spores in structure and function, along with moving to a safer location and a less population density, could make it definitely survivable. Because of this, and because Vita Carnis isn't nearly as catastrophic as Gemini Home Entertainment, I would rate it a 6 on the We're Screwed scale. I might get some hate for that, as in my opinion it is more avoidable and counterable than alternates. Now, before I move on to Greylock, why did no one warn me about how disturbing this series was? I went into this series expecting it to be about as scary as Vita Carni, and I was not expecting, nor was I ready for the horrific experience that was Greylock.
Continued efforts of law enforcement, life has been able to return back to normal. Back to normal. Back to normal. To normal. To normal. To normal. Back to normal for residents of Berkshire County.
There was a point where I was generally debating not covering it anymore because I didn't want to finish the series, but as a horror YouTuber, I will not be letting an analog horror series take me down. Now, I spent a lot of time figuring out how I was going to, as you say, logically approach this series, as it is probably one of the most confusing and least covered, and unlike Vita Carnis, our antagonists or entities are not clearly shown. It is not said what they truly are or what they are capable of, and this part is why it's so scary. If you haven't seen Greylock, I'll give you a brief summary. Mount Greylock, Massachusetts became the constructing product of a technology company known by Semiodyne that has ties to the government, and we all know it isn't truly a good analog horror without some government corruption. Semiodyne is known for its innovative products that definitely aren't spyware, as well as their ability to bring ghosts into real life. Now, I use the term ghost very loosely, and moving forward I will be referring to them as thought forms, or in terms fans of Mandela Catalog would understand, a tulpa, which actually by definition are beings that are being willed into existence from one's mind space into the physical reality. Usually this is reserved for ancient peoples with massive amounts of discipline, like the Tibetan monks or some other similar cultures, but this company has decided to make a machine that wills them into existence, which you can imagine went poorly, especially when they decided to build their test facility inside of Mount Greylock. Now that you know the basics, we can get into the major events and how you could possibly increase your chances of survival. Spoiler alert, it's almost impossible. Rewinding back to before the research facility was put into Mount Greylock, we see our first major event happen, looking into the shoes of Paul Morelli, who is the leader of the Morelli Construction Company, who were instructed to prepare Mount Greylock for the construction of the facility. Initially, Paul discovered a secret tunnel leading into the mountain and decided to clear it. It wasn't until the next day he returned to find the tunnel already had been cleared, along with his crew's health slowly deteriorating. And to make matters worse, a tall masked creature is roaming the woods, stalking them. Upon sending their archaeologist, Arnold Rivers, into the mountain, he returns with knowledge of many various artifacts that are incredibly old, like really old, BC old. He later confirms that they were not left there accidentally, but rather as... He immediately resigns from the project and leaves Mount Greylock. Paul's entire crew is rendered unconscious eventually, and none of his phones work. Then eventually, he himself succumbs to the disease.
I think I caught whatever's going around. My skin, it feels tight, a lot of pressure behind my eyes. My teeth feel like they're humming, vibrating. You know what? This all started when we came across that tunnel. I feel like I need to figure out what's down there. I think whatever's down there could help my crew, but most of all, I feel like something really bad's gonna happen if I don't go down, so I'm going down tonight.
Now, in order to change the decisions made by Paul, eventually leading to his death, we have to figure out a better method of what steps to take to survive this creature in the forest, that we will go more into later. In this scenario, it is seen using bio and psychological warfare as to wear down the men's sanity as well as their physical health. We don't know this exact disease as it doesn't exist in real life. We know it makes the victim's skin feel tight, their eyes feel like they're going to pop out, and it is assumed intense fatigue and other flu-like symptoms, as Paul had a bad cough, as well as his team being immobilized, eventually leading to them becoming unresponsive, followed by each of them eventually being turned into disturbing zombie-like creatures, some carrying the ability to manipulate others, some spreading a disease that has a 98% death rate. Logically, if you look past supernatural means, there has to be a method of contracting this disease. And since none of the workers describe being bitten or scratched or attacked in any way, we can assume that this virus or bacterium is spread via airborne. Whether it is contracted from the entity itself or from inside the cave is unconfirmed. But due to its crew becoming sick as the entity started appearing and not right as they entered the cave, I can assume that it is the former. That this entity emits this disease into the air, possibly when the miners are asleep. The only method of 100% avoiding this would be to use a more intense method of the previous strategy, using heavy protective filtration masks, each with their own oxygen supply, similar to if you were going scuba diving, but ones that work on land. That way, whatever disease is being breathed in can't be contracted, and although it will draw out the process, refraining from eating anything within a mile or two of Mount Greylock would be the best course of action. And since the nearest town is relatively close, this shouldn't be a problem, especially because this thing rots all their fruit anyways. If this filtration method can fight things like methane gas, it should be able to fight an airborne disease too, assuming this creature doesn't have godlike powers, and in that case, it's better to just leave the mountain as soon as possible, like Arnold did, and pray this creature doesn't follow you home.
Come on out, it's the police.
Following the events of the mountain, an emergency broadcast was issued. A massive home invasion spree was spreading throughout the surrounding towns, as it is theorized that this is due to the infected mining team becoming aggressive and breaking into homes. This one is simple enough, as they aren't shown to have any crazy unavoidable powers. Simply treat them how you would treat zombies, and if you don't feel safe, retreat with a weapon to a local police station or one of the grocery marts that has been turned into a safe zone by police. It is important to seal your house's basement door with reinforcements, as it is theorized many of them enter up through there for an unknown reason. And while many of the kidnaps were successful, the people in this series just seem to be unexplainably stupid. Hearing an emergency alert saying to lock your windows, and then the first thing they think to do is immediately look out and open your window? Like, really? Now moving on to our final threat being the masked creature from before, known colloquially as White Mask on the wiki. Similar to many of the other threats in this series, we know little about White Mask, only that it was most likely that it was what was being worshipped all these years, possesses extreme height, can move at insane speeds, and possesses large levels of intelligence, along with being able to imitate the voices of its victims, similar to, say, SCP-939. This seems to be the mimic of the series, being the biggest and main threat. So in order to try to analyze this thing, we're going to need to view over its very few appearances. It appears to stalk Paul's crew in the forest, showing up briefly on the trail cams, and then is shown to later follow Arnold home and break into his house from the basement, searching his house before finally killing him because, once again, he was hiding in the closet with his goddamn light on. Come on guys, this is where we are now with intelligence. One thing I did notice is although it did find Arnold's house, it didn't find him immediately, rather searching around his house frantically until Arnold responded to one of its fake calls, ending in him being found and his death. The best solution to this would be to lock as many of the doors in your house as possible, then pick a random place to hide in. Be quiet, no matter what you hear, and keep it dark. I mean, worst case scenario, it kills you. It's not going to change anything whether you're in the dark, but it will decrease the chances of it finding your location. Although it seems to prefer lunging at victims with its teeth and devouring them whole, so wearing thicker clothing and using an object to block its face until you can use some sort of weapon could be a desperate last-ditch attempt. And if you survive this thing once, leave immediately. Go as far as you can. It is assumed this thing won't go super far from Greylock, especially if it has lost track of you. But overall, if you become the target of this thing, similar to woodcrawlers, there's not much you can do. Since Greylock is a very new series, it's super hard to give it an accurate rating, but based off of the knowledge we know right now, and how situational it is, I would rate it an 8 for now, due to the potential of how dangerous these creatures could be. And because I have a feeling the situation in Greylock is just going to get worse from here, but this still leaves Greylock as the more dangerous of our two choices today. I hope you all enjoyed part 2 of a logical approach to analog horror, so keep a lookout for more horror games that I'll be covering in this format, and if you like this video, consider subscribing, it means a lot.
Well, that was quite an adventure. I'm sad to see you go, but don't worry, this doesn't have to be the last time we see each other. I got another cool video, just for you. Hurry, the video's almost over.